Hello and welcome to our brief summary of the 12 Labors of Hercules. The 12 Labors of Hercules, or Herakles, occupy a special place in the pantheon of Greek mythology and in the worldview of the ancient Greeks. Touching on the themes of madness, murder, and atonement, the 12 Labors of Hercules exemplify a great many of the ancient beliefs of the Greeks about human nature, and even explain how the constellations and the Milky Way itself were formed. Many areas in Greece, especially on the Peloponnesian Peninsula, are mentioned as part of the labors he performed, and many of them today are recognized for the part they played in Greek mythology. The mythological figure's labors are a series of feats carried out as penance for crimes he committed, yet was not fully responsible for. Like so many other figures from Greek mythology, such as Oedipus, he was a tragic individual, fated to carry out his crimes by powers that controlled his life. Herakles, whose name was later Romanized as Hercules, was the greatest of all Greek heroes. He undertook his feats at the service of King Eurystheus, who was continually portrayed as being a comic figure who was cowed by the great man's strength and daring-do. The 12 Labors were later connected by a continuous narrative in the form of one epic poem, which has tragically since been lost, written by Pisander, dating back to about 600 BC. Hera, the wife of the Greek god Zeus, had tried to kill Hercules ever since he was born because she was angry that her husband had fathered him with the lovely Alcmene. After being tricked into suckling the infant, she was fixated on getting revenge for the indignity. She sent 2 snakes into his crib, but he dispatched them immediately with the strength that he had received from Hera through her milk. She later induced a madness in Hercules that made him unknowingly kill his wife, Megara, and their sons. Our hero, filled with shame and racked with guilt, went to Pythia, the oracle of Delphi, to atone. He prayed to the god Apollo for guidance and was told to go to Tiryns to serve the king of Mycenae, Eurystheus, for 10 years as atonement for his crimes. He was then tasked with performing a series of astoundingly difficult feats called labors, which took place all over ancient Greece. If he succeeded, he would not only atone for his crimes, but be rewarded with immortality as well. Hercules actually despaired at the words of the oracle, loath to serve a man whom he knew to be far inferior to himself, yet fearing to oppose his father, Zeus. Eventually, he placed himself at King Eurystheus's disposal. Eurystheus originally ordered Hercules to perform 10 labors. He duly accomplished these tasks, but Eurystheus refused to recognize 2 of them: the slaying of the Lernaean Hydra, since Heracles' nephew and charioteer Iolaus had helped him, and the cleansing of the Augean stables because Heracles had accepted payment for the labor. The king set 2 more tasks: fetching the golden apples of Hesperides and capturing the dog Cerberus, which Heracles also performed, bringing the total number of tasks to 12. Of the 12 Labors of Hercules, the first 6 were located in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. 6 others took the hero farther afield, to places that were all previously strongholds of Hera or the goddess, and were believed to be entrances to the netherworld. In the completion of his monumental tasks, Hercules was sometimes accompanied by a male companion, an Eromenos, or Iolaus, his nephew. A traditional order of the 12 Labors of Hercules is slaying the Nemean lion, slaying the 9-headed Lernaean Hydra, capturing the Cyrenian hind, capturing the Erymanthian boar, cleaning the Augean stables in a single day, slaying the Stymphalian birds, capturing the Cretan bull, stealing the mares of Diomedes, obtaining the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, obtaining the cattle of the 3-bodied giant Geryon, stealing 3 of the golden apples of the Hesperides, and finally, capturing and bringing back Cerberus, the dog belonging to Hades. Hercules wandered until he came to the town of Cleonae. There, he met a boy who said that if he slew the Nemean lion and returned alive within 30 days, the town would sacrifice a lion to Zeus. However, if Hercules did not return within 30 days, or if he died, the boy would sacrifice himself to Zeus. When he found and shot the lion, firing at it with his bow, he discovered the fur's protective property as the arrow bounced harmlessly off the creature's thigh. After some time, Hercules made the lion return to his cave. In those close quarters, Herakles was able to stun the beast with his club, and using his immense strength, strangle it to death. During the fight, the lion bit off one of his fingers. Others say that he shot arrows at it, eventually shooting it in the unarmored mouth. After slaying the lion, our hero tried to skin it with a knife from his belt, but failed. He then tried sharpening the knife with a stone, and even tried with the stone itself. Finally, the goddess Athena, noticing the hero's plight, told Herakles to use one of the lion's own claws to skin the pelt. When he returned on the 30th day, carrying the carcass of the lion on his shoulders, King Eurystheus was amazed and terrified. Afraid of the man's incredible powers, Eurystheus forbade him ever again to enter the city. From then on, he was to display the fruits of his labors outside the city gates. Eurystheus would not even announce Hercules' tasks personally, opting to go through a herald. The king was so afraid of the hero's incredible power that he even had a large bronze jar made for himself in which to hide from Hercules if the need arose. Eurystheus then warned Hercules that his assigned tasks would become increasingly difficult. Hercules' second labor was to slay the Lernaean Hydra, which Hera had specifically raised in order to slay him. Upon reaching the swamp near Lake Lerna, where the Hydra dwelt, Hercules used a cloth to cover his mouth and nose to protect himself from the poisonous fumes. He fired flaming arrows into the Hydra's lair, the spring of Amymone, which was in a deep cave that it only emerged from to terrorize nearby villages. He then confronted the Hydra, wielding either a harvesting sickle, a sword, or his famed club. But of course, upon cutting off each of its heads, he found that two grew back, an expression of the hopelessness of such a struggle for any but our hero. Additionally, one of the Hydra's heads, the middle one, was immortal. The details of the struggle are laid out in the Bibliotheca. Realizing that he could not defeat the Hydra in this way, Hercules called on his nephew Iolaus for help. His nephew then came upon the idea, possibly inspired by Athena, of using a firebrand to scorch the neck stumps after each decapitation. Hercules cut off each head, and Iolaus then cauterized the open stumps. Seeing that Hercules was winning the struggle, Hera sent a giant crab to distract him, but of course crushed it under his foot. He cut off the Hydra's one immortal head with a golden sword, which had been given to him by Athena. Hercules placed it under a great rock on the sacred way between Lerna and Ilias, and dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood, thereby completing his second task. Hera, upset that Hercules had slain the beast that she had raised to kill him, placed it in the dark blue vault of the sky as the constellation Hydra. She then turned the crab into the constellation Cancer. Later, Hercules used an arrow dipped in the Hydra's poisonous blood to kill the centaur Nessus, and Nessus's tainted blood was applied to the tunic of Nessus, by which the centaur had his posthumous revenge on Hercules. Both the geographer Strabo and the Greek writer Pausanias stated that the stench of the river Anigris in Elis, making all the fish of the river inedible, was reputed to be due to the Hydra's venom, which had been washed from the arrows Hercules used on the centaur. Eurystheus and Hera were greatly angered that Hercules had survived both the Nemean lion and the Lernaean Hydra. For the third labor, they found a task which they thought would spell doom for the hero. Since it was clear that Hercules could overcome even the most fearsome opponents by his great strength, Eurystheus ordered him to capture the Cyrenian hind, which was so fast that it could outrun an arrow. One day, Hercules awoke from sleeping and spotted the hind by a glint of sunlight on its antlers. Hercules then chased the animal on foot through Greece, Thrace, Istria, and the land of the Hyperboreans for one entire year. In some versions of the story, he captured the hind while it slept. In other versions, Artemis told him to leave the hind and tell Eurystheus all that had happened, and his third labor would be considered to be completed. Yet another version states that Herakles brought down the hind with an arrow between its forelegs. King Eurystheus had given Hercules this task hoping to incite Artemis's anger at Herakles for his desecration of her sacred animal. As he was returning with the hind, Hercules encountered Artemis and her brother Apollo. He begged the goddess for forgiveness, explaining that he had to catch it as part of his penance, but he promised to return it. Artemis forgave him, foiling Eurystheus's plan. Upon bringing the hind to Eurystheus, Hercules was told that it was to become part of the king's menagerie. Hercules knew that he had to return the hind as he had promised, so he agreed to hand it over as long as Eurystheus himself came out and took it from him. The king then appeared, but the moment that Hercules let the hind go, it sprinted back to its mistress. Hercules left, commenting that Eurystheus had not been quick enough. By some accounts, the fourth labor was to bring the fearsome Erymanthian boar back to Eurystheus alive. On the way to Mount Erymanthos, where the boar lived, Hercules visited Pholus, the caveman, a kind and hospitable centaur and old friend. Hercules ate with Pholus in his cavern and asked for wine. Pholus had only one jar of wine, a gift from Dionysus to all the centaurs on Mount Erymanthos. Hercules convinced him to open it, and the scent attracted the other centaurs. They did not understand that wine needs to be tempered with water, so they became drunk and attacked Hercules. He shot at them with his poisonous arrows, killing many, and the centaurs retreated all the way to Chiron's cave. Pholus was curious why the arrows caused so much death. He picked one up, but dropped it, and the arrow stabbed his hoof, poisoning him. One version states that a stray arrow hit Chiron as well. He was immortal, but he still felt the pain. Chiron's pain was so great that he volunteered to give up his immortality and take the place of Prometheus, who had been chained to the top of a mountain to have his liver eaten daily by an eagle. Prometheus's torturer, the eagle, continued its tormenting of Chiron, so Hercules shot it dead with an arrow. The tale is believed to be meant to show Hercules as being the recipient of Chiron's surrendered immortality. However, this tale contradicts the fact that Chiron later taught Achilles. The tale of the centaurs sometimes appears in other parts of the 12 Labors, as does the freeing of Prometheus. Hercules had visited Chiron to gain advice on how to catch the boar, and Chiron had told him to drive it into thick snow, which sets this labor in midwinter. Hercules indeed caught the boar, bound it, and carried it back to King Eurystheus, who was so frightened of it that he ducked down in his custom-made storage pithos, begging Hercules to get rid of the fearsome beast. The fifth labor was to clean the stables of King Augeas. This assignment was intended to be both humiliating and impossible, since these divine livestock were immortal and produced prodigious quantities of manure. The Augean stables had not been cleaned in over 30 years, and over 1,000 cattle lived there. However, Hercules succeeded by rerouting the rivers Alpheus and Peneus to wash out the filth. Before starting on the gargantuan task, Hercules had asked Augeas for 1/10 of the cattle if he finished the task in one day, and Augeas agreed. However, Augeas refused to honor the agreement on the grounds that Herakles had been ordered to carry out the task by Eurystheus anyway. Hercules claimed his reward in court and was supported by Augeas's son Phyleus. Augeas banished them both before the court had ruled. Hercules returned, slew Augeas, and gave his kingdom to Phyleus. The success of this labor was ultimately discounted as the rushing waters had done the work of cleaning the stables, and because Herakles was paid for completing the task. King Eurystheus therefore determined that Hercules still had 7 labors to perform. The 6th labor was to defeat the Stymphalian birds, who were known to eat men, having beaks made of bronze and sharp metallic feathers which they could launch at their victims. The avians were sacred to Ares, the Greek god of war. In addition, their droppings were highly toxic. They had migrated to Lake Stymphalia in Arcadia, where they bred quickly and took over the countryside, destroying local crops, fruit trees, and even townspeople. Hercules could not go too far into the swamp where they dwelt because it would not support his weight. Athena, taking pity on Hercules, gave him a rattle which Hephaestus had made especially for the occasion. Heracles shook the rattle and frightened the birds into the air. Hercules then shot many of them with his arrows. The rest flew far away, never to return. The Argonauts would later encounter these creatures in their own exploits. The 7th labor was to capture the Cretan bull, the father of the Minotaur. Hercules sailed to the island of Crete, where King Minos gave him permission to take the bull away and even offered him assistance. The bull had been wreaking havoc on Crete by uprooting crops and leveling orchard walls. Hercules snuck up behind the powerful animal and then used his hands to throttle it, stopping before it was killed, and then shipping it back to Tiryns. King Eurystheus, who hid again in his pythos at the sight of the creature, wanted to sacrifice the bull to Hera, who hated Hercules. She refused the sacrifice because it reflected glory on Hercules. The bull was then released and wandered into Marathon, becoming known as the Marathonian bull. Theseus would later sacrifice the bull to Athena and/or Apollo. As the 8th of his 12 labors, also categorized as the 2nd of the non-Peloponnesian labors, Hercules was sent by King Eurystheus to steal the mares from Diomedes. The mares' madness was attributed to their unnatural diet, which consisted of the flesh of unsuspecting guests or strangers to the island. Some versions of the myth say that the mares also expelled fire when they breathed. The mares, which were the terror of Thrace, were kept tethered by iron chains to a bronze manger in the now vanished city of Tyrrhida. They were named Podargos, the swift, Lampon, the shining, Xanthos, the yellow, and Danos, or Danis, the terrible. In one version of this feat, Herakles brought a number of volunteers to help him capture the giant horses. After overpowering Diomedes' men, he broke the chains that tethered the horses and drove the mares down to sea. Unaware that they were man-eating and uncontrollable, Herakles left them in the charge of his favored companion, Abderus, while he left to fight Diomedes. Upon his return, Herakles found that the boy had been eaten. As revenge, Herakles fed Diomedes to his own horses and then founded Abdera next to the boy's tomb. In another version, Herakles, who was visiting the island, stayed awake so that he didn't have his throat cut by Diomedes in the night and cut the chains binding the horses once everyone was asleep. Having scared the horses onto the high ground of a knoll, Herakles quickly dug a trench through the peninsula, filling it with water and thus flooding the low-lying plain. When Diomedes and his men turned to flee, Herakles killed them with an axe and fed Diomedes' body to the horses to calm them. All the versions of this disturbing story relate how eating human flesh makes the horses calmer, giving Herakles the opportunity to bind their mouths shut and easily take them back to King Eurystheus, who dedicated the horses to Hera. After this feat was accomplished by our hero, King Eurystheus sent Herakles to bring back Hippolyta's girdle, King Eurystheus's daughter Admete desired the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, which had been a gift from her father Ares. To please his daughter, Eurystheus ordered Herakles to retrieve the belt as his 9th great labor. Taking a band of friends with him, Herakles set sail, stopping at the island of Paros, which was inhabited by the sons of Minos. Herakles took 2 of Minos's grandsons, Alcaeus and Sthenelus, continuing on their voyage and landing at the court of Lycus, whom Herakles defended in a battle against King Mygdon of Bebryces. After killing King Mygdon, Herakles gave much of the land to his friend Lycus. Lycus called the land Heraclea. The crew then set off for Themyscira, where Hippolyta lived. All would have gone well for Herakles had it not been for Hera. Hippolyta, impressed with Herakles and his exploits, agreed to give him the belt, and would have done so had Hera not disguised herself and walked among the Amazons, sowing seeds of distrust. She claimed the strangers were plotting to carry off the queen of the Amazons. Alarmed, the women set off on horseback to confront Herakles. When Herakles saw them, he thought Hippolyta had been plotting such treachery all along and had never meant to hand over the belt, so he killed her, took the belt, and returned to Eurystheus. The 10th labor was to obtain the cattle of the 3-bodied giant Geryon. In the fullest account in the Bibliotheca of Pseudo-Apollodorus, Herakles had to go to the island of Erythea in the far west, sometimes identified with the Hesperides or with the island which forms the city of Cadiz, Spain, to obtain the cattle. On the way there, he crossed the Libyan desert and became so frustrated at the heat that he shot an arrow at the sun. The sun god Helios, in admiration of his courage, gave Herakles the golden cup Helios used to sail across the sea from west to east each night. Herakles delivered the cup to Erythea. Herakles, portrayed riding in this cup, was a favorite motif on ancient Greek black figure pottery. Such a magical conveyance, of course, undercuts any literal geographic location for Erythea, the red island of the sunset. When Herakles landed at Erythea, he was confronted by the 2-headed dog, Orthrus. With one blow from his olive wood club, Herakles killed the beast. Eurytion the herdsman came to assist Orthrus, but Herakles dealt with him the same way. On hearing the commotion, Geryon sprang into action, carrying 3 shields and 3 spears and wearing 3 helmets. He attacked Herakles at the river Anthemus, but was slain by one of Herakles' poisoned arrows. Herakles shot so forcefully that the arrow pierced Geryon's forehead, and Geryon bent his neck over to one side like a poppy that spoils its delicate shapes, shedding its petals all at once. Herakles then had to herd the cattle back to Eurystheus. The giant Cacus, who lived there, stole some of the cattle as Herakles slept, making the cattle walk backwards so that they left no trail, a repetition of the trick of the young Hermes. To annoy Herakles, Hera sent a gadfly to bite the cattle, irritate them, and scatter them. Within a year, Herakles retrieved them. Hera then sent a flood, which raised the level of a river so much that Herakles could not cross with the cattle. He piled stones into the river to make the water shallower. When he finally reached the court of Eurystheus, the cattle were sacrificed to Hera. After Herakles completed the first 10 labors, Eurystheus gave him 2 more, after claiming that slaying the Hydra and cleaning the Augean stables did not count. The first additional labor was to steal 3 of the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides. Hercules had to first catch the old man of the sea, the shape-shifting sea god, in order to learn where the garden of the Hesperides was located. Hercules made his way to the garden of the Hesperides, where he encountered Atlas holding up the heavens on his shoulders. Hercules persuaded Atlas to get the 3 golden apples for him by offering to hold up the heavens in his place for a little while. Atlas could get the apples because, in this version, he was the father or otherwise related to the Hesperides. This would have made the labor like the Hydra and the Augean stables void because Herakles had received help. When Atlas returned, he decided that he did not want to take the heavens back, and instead offered to deliver the apples himself. But Hercules tricked him by agreeing to remain in place of Atlas on the condition that Atlas relieve him temporarily while Herakles adjusted his cloak. Atlas agreed, but Hercules reneged and walked away with the apples. King Eurystheus was again furious that Herakles had accomplished something that he had thought could not possibly be done. The 12th and final labor was the capture of Cerberus, the three-headed dragon-tailed dog that was the guardian of the gates of the underworld. To prepare for his descent into the underworld, Herakles went to Eleusis, or Athens, to be initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries. He then entered the underworld with the gods Hermes and Athena as his guides. While in the underworld, Hercules met Theseus and Pirithous. The two companions had been imprisoned by Hades for attempting to kidnap Persephone. Hades feigned hospitality and prepared a feast, inviting them to sit. They unknowingly sat in chairs of forgetfulness and were permanently ensnared. When Herakles had pulled Theseus first from his chair, some of his thighs stuck to it. This explains the supposedly lean thighs of Athenians. But the earth shook at the attempt to liberate Pirithous, whose desire to have the goddess for himself was so insulting that he was doomed to stay behind. Hercules found Hades and asked permission to bring Cerberus to the surface, which Hades agreed to if Hercules could subdue the beast without using weapons. Herakles overpowered Cerberus with his bare hands and slung the beast over his back. He carried Cerberus out of the underworld through a cavern entrance in the Peloponnese and brought it to King Eurystheus, who again fled into his Pythos in fear. Eurystheus begged Hercules to return Cerberus to the underworld, offering in return to release him from any further labor when Cerberus disappeared back to his master. According to Euripides' play Herakles, it is at this point after his labors are completed and he is returning home to meet his wife and family that he is driven mad and kills them, after which he is exiled from Thebes and leaves for Athens. He also successfully fought the river god Achilles for the hand of Deianira, according to some legends. As he was taking her home, the centaur Nessus attempted to violate her, and Herakles. As the centaur lay dying, he told Deianira to preserve the blood from his wound, and if Herakles wore a garment rubbed with it, he would love only her forever. Several years later, however, Herakles fell in love with Iole, the daughter of Eurytus, who was the king of Oechalia. Deianira then sent Hercules a garment smeared with the blood of the centaur. A grim plot twist occurred at that point, however, as the blood acted as a powerful poison, and the great Herakles died. His body was then placed on a pyre on Mount Oeta, and his mortal remains were consumed. However, true to his mythological powers, his divine part ascended to heaven, becoming a god. After arriving there, he was reconciled to Hera and then married Hebe. And this concludes our summary of the mighty Hercules and his incredible 12 labors. And as always, thank you for taking this journey with us. We'll see you next time.